The home of the common Joe and the common Sally in the know, even more so than all those media talking heads. You know how your mom and dad used to do something to try to test you, to see if you learn from their advice or if you learn from your mistakes? I think the Texas-Alabama game is a way of the football gods testing the Big 12 to see if they've learned anything about their mistakes and why their conference has imploded somewhat over the years. Let's talk back in here real quick to ask you guys and gals for a favor. If you'll look under the video where it's the like button and the share button on down, if you're scrolling down a little bit next to the download option, you'll see a heart that says thanks. You can actually donate to the show, and that way I don't have to depend on YouTube's ads as much, and I can continue to just say whatever the hell I want. Now back to the show. Well, here we are again, another episode of the OCF. That's me, the outlaw of college football, also known as JPC. That's right. And today, class, we're going to talk about the fact of the Big 12 and if they've learned from some of their mistakes. And while this may seem trivial to some, to people that like to tailgate and like to party the night before and like college football and all of its tailgating intricacies, it is a big deal. 11 o'clock and 12 o'clock games are not conducive to tailgating. And they're not conducive to, enjoying the traditions throughout the day on Saturday. And what I'm speaking of, class, is the fact that last year and years before, Oklahoma had complained about the Big 12's handling of their games and having them kick off at 11 or 12 o'clock, which is not a great time for anybody. Even people out on the West Coast. I mean, that's an awful time. If you want to get up and watch a little variety and you're tired of watching Pac-12 football, you have to get up at 10 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning to watch a football game from the East Coast. And the reason why I'm talking about this is Alabama and Texas is going to be on Fox this year. If they put that game on at 12 o'clock, then all the possible me feeling sorry for them or sympathizing with them is out the window. Because you do not put a game with those two kind of brands on at 12 o'clock because you're afraid to compete with CBS or ESPN. That's a game that you can take into war with these networks and compete with. A game that could put you over the top a little bit, put you in a good position to compete with these networks. And it's going to be a fleeting moment for Fox as well. It's not like they're going to get these games handed to them very often in a few years because, as we know, Texas will be a part of the SEC, as will Oklahoma. And those games you will not be getting on Fox anymore because they will be a part of the SEC and ESPN and CBS if they're still around. I think CBS is going to be pushed out as well. I think after, it was 2023 maybe, I think. I could be wrong about that. You guys and gals tell me whether you think whether that's wrong or not. But if CBS is out of the mix, well then guess what? All those games are going to go to ESPN. Not something that makes me entirely happy, but at least with ESPN, I don't have to deal with them putting a game with that kind of marquee labeling on at 11 or 12 o'clock. Now, I could understand if you're putting on a game between Bowling Green and Ohio State or something like that at 11 or 12 o'clock, or Alabama versus Stetson or some shit like that, but you don't put two marquee names like that on at 11 or 12 o'clock. Now, I know for years they've done the Cotton Bowl at 11 o'clock, and that's some kind of tradition with the State Fair in Dallas and whatnot. But that game is an outlier. For the most part, most games are not very well appreciated, and it's just way too early, especially for the college crowd. You got these guys out here getting drunk in the middle of the night, guys and gals, getting drunk on into the middle of the night up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They're just not going to get up, or they're not going to want to get up, and they're not going to be as spry getting up at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning to try to make it through the traffic to get to one of these games that's going to have a hell of a lot of traffic. So this is a chance for Fox to prove that they've learned from their mistakes. It's time for them to prove to the Big 12 that they've learned from their mistakes. The Big 12 controls this somewhat, so the Big 12 needs to learn from their mistakes as well and tell Fox, hey, look, let's put this game on at least 2:30. At least somewhere that we're trying to imagine that we can compete. Because if you can't compete with a game like Alabama and Texas, well, then you need to get out of the college football business altogether. Because that's a game that you can market. And that's why Oklahoma and Texas, that's some of the reasons why they are leaving the Big 12. You know, all these Big 12 teams are crying and wetting their little diapers about this shit. But they done it to themselves because they try to dictate to Oklahoma and Texas and pretend like they're on the same level as Oklahoma and Texas. Now, in a perfect world, you're in a conference together and you all should be equal. But it's not a perfect world. And they're not equal. You put your big money makers on until your other teams can become big money makers. And when Baylor and Oklahoma State and Kansas State start winning national championships and becoming a big boy at the table and not just being a mid-carder, well, then they can complain and say, hey, to Oklahoma and Texas should have to play at 12 o'clock too. No, they shouldn't. You should put your best foot forward. If you're having a night game and you got a choice between Oklahoma versus, I don't know, Kansas State, Oklahoma's a marquee name. You put the Oklahoma-Kansas State going on at 7 o'clock, even if Kansas State's not ranked and they've lost their first 7 ball games, you put that game on because of the Oklahoma name. But what they were doing was, with Bowlesby and whatnot, is they were trying to be fair. Oh, but Baylor versus TCU, these two guys are ranked a little bit higher than Kansas State or Oklahoma. Well, that's fine, but Baylor and TCU are not going to bring you the eyeballs that you need. You can still put Baylor and TCU on. Just don't give them prime time until Baylor or TCU proves their worth nationally and wins a national championship. These are the little things that cost the Big 12, Oklahoma and Texas as members. And going forward, they got a little bit of a bright future. They've done some good things in the offseason that may lend to them keeping their Power 5 status. Getting BYU was one of them. Nobody talks about them getting BYU. They don't want to acknowledge BYU because of some of their religious beliefs, which is stupid. College football and religious beliefs are irrelevant. That should be irrelevant as to who you have in your conference and who you're going to put on National Showcase, because BYU has a huge alumni following. They got BYU, they got Houston, they got Central Florida, who has an amazing fan base as far as enrollment, has one of the biggest enrollments in America. So, in closing, Big 12, Fox, learn from your mistakes. Do not put this Alabama-Texas game on at 12 o'clock, because if you do, I don't feel sorry for you anymore. And that's all I got to say about that. Like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. And I got a new ending for you. Class is now dismissed.